tune you're about to hear is true. Any similarity to persons living or in politics is purely intentional. The facts are about to come out. Tuesday, September 28, 1954, 6 a.m. The voters are beginning to be free. They're voting for number 3.
Voters, voters, hear my plea. Here's a tale about 1, 2, 3. Said number 1 to number 2. Let's get together, me and you. Since we're both of the same old tree, let's team up and beat number 3. Side by side, just you and me. We'll fool the voters, yes sir. Voters, voters, hear my plea. Voters, let us all be free. Let's team up and shake that tree and cast our vote for number 3.
Thank you very much, Mr. Don Gatz. Good afternoon, my friends. Not counting today, there are 23 days left before the election on November the 9th, and before you know it, the second primary will be upon us. We must not become confused with the general election, which will be held on November the 2nd. At that election, you will vote on the amendments for your judge, your district attorney, your school board member, your congressman, and your United States senator. The city election for mayor, trustee of finance, and trustee of public property will be held on Tuesday, November the 9th. May I remind you that the polls will open at 6 o'clock in the morning and close at 8 o'clock in the evening. The military ballots for the city election will be available on about October the 20th. The family must make a request of the clerk of court for a ballot to be sent to the person in the military service. An absentee ballot can be cast on Saturday, October the 30th until noon, and up to and including Saturday, November the 6th at noon. I repeat, the absentee ballot for the city election can be cast between Saturday, October the 30th and Saturday, November the 6th. Last Sunday, I told you that I would have my sample ballots ready as soon as they are released by the Secretary of State. My sample ballot will be a combination: a picture card, the bottom of which will show the voting machine lever, exposing the X over my voting machine number and my name. Permit me to repeat that the general election will be held on Tuesday, November the 2nd, and our election, the city election, will be held 1 week later on Tuesday, November the 9th. My friends, my remarks today are not intended, nor should they be interpreted as a personal reflection upon the character or personal traits of the other contestant for mayor. I shall comment on his printed and recorded statements, and of course upon the political impressions made upon me as a result of these inept pronouncements. It is difficult, to say the least, to completely dissociate the author from his works. As I listened to my opponent talk over the radio last Sunday in the afternoon, I noted his tense and trenchant manner, bordering on irritation, mingled with a tinge of frustration. Also, I understood that he was debating with himself as to whether he should jump in the political pool and really get wet. So I gathered He took off his socks and played in the water with his toes, feeling the temperature, while counseling with himself and perhaps with his political entourage the proper course to follow, since the eye-opening first primary disclosed such a small minority vote for his political machine. My opponent opened his talk with the following, I quote, "I have been tagged with the label of horse in this mayor's race. Well, that's fine. We are now in the home stretch, and I very clearly see victory ahead for this horse," unquote. This is too good to pass up. My friends, I am sure that you are familiar with the racing techniques. According to custom, this horse has a saddle on his back, but it is an unusual saddle. It is a long saddle. It is a tandem saddle, like a tandem bicycle. It has room for several people. Now, every horse in the race has a jockey, but this horse has several jockeys, and with the flying shells and the clouds of dust, it is hard to recognize all of them, but I distinctly recognize the first jockey holding the reins and enthusiastically flogging his horse with the rod of empire. This recognizable jockey is none other than the city chief of police. Later on, as this horse approaches the finish line, we will probably have an opportunity to identify the other jockeys in that long tandem saddle. In addressing you, my friends, Sunday after Sunday since August the 8th, I have made a sincere effort to stick to the facts in this race and to give you a detailed platform for your consideration. My rival candidate seems to talk rather loosely, with the end of indoctrinating you or guiding your thinking with inaccurate and misleading statements. Last Sunday he said, and I quote, "In appreciation of the overwhelming vote of confidence you placed in me," close quotation. Unless someone has altered the results of this race, wherein I was high man for mayor, the record shows I led all candidates in the first primary. I would like to know where he received that overwhelming vote of confidence. Webster's Collegiate Dictionary defines overwhelm as follows: to overturn, to cover over completely as by a great wave, to submerge, hence to overpower, to crush. Since this statement was made on October the 10th, after the first primary, I call upon my opponent to explain the purpose of this inaccurate, non-factual, misinforming statement. Let's confine ourselves to the plain facts without resorting to wishful thinking and childish make-believe. Let's stick to the facts and not resort to fantasy. At another point in his address, my political adversary stated, I quote, "So that every citizen of Thibodaux, not just a few, shall reap the advantages," unquote. I have been attempting to analyze this remark, since my opponent is supported by and endorsed by the incumbent and his machine. Does he mean in the past that all of the citizens of Thibodaux did not receive the benefits, but that these benefits were confined to just a few? If he has positive knowledge that this condition has existed in the past and is still existing, I think these instances of favoritism to just a few should be brought out in the open in this campaign for the consideration of our voters. Again, I say, let's get to the facts. Let's get to the meat in the coconut. Earlier, in my talk, I mentioned that my opponent has an air of irritation. That might be discerned from this statement. I quote, "If you hear anyone say that I'm not out to win, that I don't care whether I'm elected or not, bring him to me and let me give him the answer. The answer is this: I am out to win, and I'm going to be the next mayor of the city of Thibodaux," unquote. This is a unique statement, to say the least. Certainly, this remark must necessarily be directed to his own followers and to his own camp. I take it that there must have been some question within his own political party as to whether he was making a serious race. This sounds like a pep talk to the football team. I wonder if his withdrawal from this race has been or is under consideration. Let's get the facts on this too. In the same talk on Sunday, my political competitor commented on his stability, his unchanging qualities. Let's look at the facts contained in that statement. In the Lafourche Comet of Thursday, August the 12th, 1954, when my opponent announced, he stated that he preferred not to make an abundance of campaign promises which may or may not be fulfilled, and etc., and continued as a summation of his platform, I quote, "I prefer to promise each and every one of you that, if elected, I will do my utmost to wait for the best interest of all of you," unquote. On August the 12th, he intended to carry out the policies of the incumbent, but the shock of the first primary disclosed that his offerings were paltry, that his cupboard was bare, that his hands were empty. So, on October the 10th, last Sunday, he made a complete about-face. He discovered that his coat was wrong side out, and he is now pretending to offer you a quasi-original 9-point platform after hearing my platform explained to our people for 8 weeks over this station. He has finally learned that his platform of doing the best that he possibly can for all of the people, all of the time, and ad-libbing as he went along, was not sufficient to measure up to the qualifications for mayor of your city. He perceived in utter amazement that our citizens placed him second to last because of his lack of purpose and lack of plans for our city. My opponent seems to have become aware that we have a junior college here, that we have a recreational program, and that we have a section of the city known as North Thibodaux. He has also learned that we have an electrical power problem, and at long last, he has taken note of that fact. My friends, if you will remember, when I ran for mayor 8 years ago, I brought up the self-same subject of our power rates. And my opponent at that time put in his platform that he intended to do something about reducing the rates of the community. That was 8 years ago. Nothing has been done about that up to now. My present opponent, backed by the incumbent mayor, after 8 weeks of campaigning in this city, has finally decided to take note of our electric rates. Now, my friends, what has become of the number one plank in my platform? The one calling for a referendum election on the council-managed form of government. My opponent does not want to talk about this. First, because the incumbent does not want to talk about it, and second, because my opponent, in the Lafourche Comet of August the 19th, 1954, said in speaking of drainage in our present form of government, I quote, "Why all the ballyhoo about them," unquote. Mind you, he said ballyhoo about your drainage and your government. Ballyhoo about you obtaining justice. How do you like that, North Thibodaux, discovered last Sunday? And how do you like that, you undiscovered territories of Ridgefield, Nicholls, the 13th Ward, and the West Side subdivisions? Talk about government for just a few. Well, this can hardly be called a consideration for all of our people. We are only asking for a democratic opportunity to vote on our form of government. Is that unreasonable, I ask you? Those are the facts, my friends, and you be the judge of his stability and his unchanging purpose. At the beginning of my talk, I said my opponent approached frustration. At one point he said, I quote, "Without resorting to silly rhymes and jingles," unquote. This illustrates that he is quite outdone and puzzled about the whole thing. He does not seem to understand that rhymes and jingles serve a definite purpose in our cultural development. Is he going to criticize the Mother Goose rhymes? The Mother Goose rhymes are the beginning of every child's education, teaching them language, morals, and splendid attitudes towards life. Is Dragnet silly? A program listened to by millions of Americans, a program that builds moral fiber in our nation. And now the brisk, cool weather we are having reminds me of the Christmas season. And would my opponent call Jingle Bells silly? Jingle Bells is a tune with rhymes that is sung by millions of people over the entire world during the approaching season. Again, I say, let's look the facts squarely in the face. In the same talk, my opponent seemed to be outdone with poetry when he stated, I quote, without the aid of poetry, unquote. Now, what's wrong with poetry? The best thoughts in all languages are expressed in poetry. Poetry is the dessert of literature. Having been thus reminded of poetry, and being the independent candidate that I am in this race, may I ask you to indulge me for just one moment. There is one poem that encourages determination and independence more than any that I have learned in my life. This poem has so impressed me that every English class that I taught in my 21 years in the schools of this parish was forced to commit this poem to memory because of its great spirit and because in times of stress, trouble, and indecision, its recitation renews one's strength. The author, William Ernest Henley, was a cripple, and he overcame a great personal handicap. His independent spirit and determination has served me as an inspiration and has served as an inspiration to many million men and women in the English-speaking world. So in closing, may I recall to your minds this masterpiece which further defines what I mean by independence. The title of this poem is Invictus. Out of the night that covers me, and black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods I may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced or cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears, there looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. I will be back with you at this time next Sunday and every Sunday until the election over this same station. This talk will be rebroadcast Friday, October the 22nd, at 5:10 in the afternoon over station KTIB. Please invite your friends and your neighbors to listen, and may I ask that you continue to work in my behalf in order that we can have an administration for all of the people during the next 4 years by voting for yourselves this time. And remember, stay on the track by sticking to the facts. So shake that tree, let's be free, and vote for number 3. Thank you very much, my friends, for listening.
This is the city, Thibodaux, Louisiana, Tuesday, November 9th, 1954, 6:00. The voters are beginning to be free. They're shaking that tree. They're voting for number 3.
Vote for number 3. Vote for number 3. For our dreams and the state factory and all the Leonard Toups farmers.
September 9th, 1954, 8:30 p.m. The voters are now free. They all voted for number 3. Here are the facts.
Our politics has ended.
Council Matting's form of government.
Reconsideration of the electric rate.
Industrial development.
A bigger and better Thibodaux.
A new era has begun.
Leonard J. Toups, your mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Don Gatz. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Not counting today, there are 15 days left before the municipal election, when you will vote for your next mayor, commissioner of finance, and commissioner of public property. Last Sunday, I told you that the general election will be held on November the 2nd. On that day, you will vote for the amendments for your Supreme Court judge, your district attorney, your school board member, your congressman, and your United States senator. On the following Tuesday, November the 9th, we will have our city election. On that day, the polls will open at 6 o'clock in the morning and will close at 8 o'clock in the evening. The military ballots for the city election are available now. The family must make a request of the clerk of court for a ballot to be sent to the person in the military service. An absentee ballot can be cast on Saturday, October the 30th until noon, and up to and including Saturday, November the 6th at noon. My sample ballot is a combination picture card and sample ballot. The bottom of this card, on the right-hand side, shows the voting machine lever exposing the X over my voting machine number and my name, just as it will appear on the voting machine. Since many of you, my friends, will cast your first ballot on the voting machines during the city election on Tuesday, November the 9th, may I say a few words about the procedure. At each polling place there will be a practice machine on which you may learn how the machine works. A commissioner will show you how it operates if you ask for this assistance. When you enter the voting machine booth, you will note a large lever at the bottom on the left-hand side. In order to close the curtains, turn this lever to your right. This will close the curtains. Then, in complete privacy, you may pull the small levers down as far as they will go, exposing the X over the names of the candidates of your choice. Be sure that the levers are down as far as they will go. Leave the levers down. By all means, do not replace the levers to their original positions. Pull the levers down and let them stay down. After you have done this, turn the big lever at the bottom to your left. Your vote will then be recorded. The small levers that you pull down over the names of the candidates that you voted for will return to their original positions, thus maintaining the secrecy of your ballot. After these small levers have returned to their original positions, the curtains will open automatically. May I ask every registered voter of our city to make plans to vote on Tuesday, November the 9th, because this is an important election for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, I was highly honored when you made me high man in the race for mayor in the first primary, and I am deeply grateful to you for this. Your vote clearly showed that you want a man for mayor who has a clean-cut and definite program for his administration. That you want a man who has the ability to carry out his program, and that you want a man who possesses the necessary leadership to carry out that program, and finally, you want a man who has the courage to give full force and effect to his platform. My opponent says, and I quote, "Yes, I already have in my file a copy of a brochure to use as a model in setting forth the numerous advantages of our community," unquote. Now, my friends, a brochure is a printed pamphlet put out by some other community or organization. This brochure is a small book, and it seems, therefore, if my opponent were to be elected, he would run the city from a book. Why should he say that he already has in his file a copy of a brochure or book to use as a model, when all he has to do is to go about the city and observe conditions as they are? I would like to know how a brochure or a book of this type can be used to improve drainage in North Thibodaux, Ridgefield Subdivision, Nicholls Subdivision, and the West Side Subdivision. I would like to know how this brochure or book would provide for a referendum election to determine whether we desire a commissioner form of government or whether we desire a council-managed charter. I would like to know how this brochure or book would handle our electrical power problem. I would like to know how this brochure or book will build an incinerator to dispose of the fetid and rotten animal matter in our garbage. I would like to know how this brochure or book will correct the blacktop conditions in our city. I would like to know how this brochure or book proposes to curb the flagrant abuse of police authority and power by the chief of police. I want to know if this brochure or book shows my opponent how every citizen of Thibodaux, not just a few, shall reap the advantages. It is self-evident, my friends, that a candidate for the office of mayor does not need a brochure or book to know and understand the advantages of our city and to know and understand the disadvantages of our city. I am afraid that my opponent is leaning too heavily on that brochure or book, because if he had moved about our city in the past 10 or 15 years with his eyes and ears open, it would not have been necessary for him to obtain a brochure or a book to find out the needs of our people. My friends, I wonder if this brochure or book will teach my opponent political experience. In the LaFourche comment of Thursday, August the 12th, 1954, my political adversary stated, and I quote, "I am not a politician, have had no experience as such, and have no ambition to become a politician," unquote. He tells you this, and at the same time he asks you for a political job. Let's follow through with this illogical and incongruous thinking for just a moment. Let's sample this folly. Suppose, by way of example, you are a housewife and an applicant for cook knocks at your door and says, "Madam, I understand that you need a cook. I want a cook for your family, but I want it distinctly understood that I am not a cook, I have no experience as a cook, and I have no ambition to become a cook. Still, I want to cook for your family. Your answer should be classic. Now let's put it another way. Let's suppose you are a mother with a sick child who needs an operation, and a person comes to you and says, "Madam, I am no doctor. I have no experience as a doctor. I have no ambitions to become a doctor, but I want to operate on your child." Now this sounds foolish because it is foolish. Your answer to the applicant for cook and your answer to the person who wants to do a doctor's technical work should be exactly the same answer that you gave to my political competitor on September the 28th in the first primary. You will give your answer again on November the 9th. The office of mayor is a business office and a political office, and I have experience in both fields. One is not born with experience. Experience is acquired by serving. I have served successfully in both the political and business requirements for mayor of your city. While on the subject of that famous brochure or book, may I ask my opponent if that brochure explains what an independent candidate is? Repeatedly, I have given a dictionary definition of independence, adding that I have no under-table agreement with any candidate, and I have no secret backdoor tie-up with any political boss. At the Agricultural Fair and Livestock Show on Saturday, September the 18th, I publicly stated that my opponent had an article in the Lafourche Comet of September the 9th, 1954, in which he referred to a team, and in the same paragraph he mentioned a general. I called upon him to identify the members of his team and to identify the general. He left those questions unanswered. In the Lafourche Comet of September the 9th, 1954, my opponent asked, and I quote, "Why should attempts be made to tie me in with any particular faction?" unquote. I shall give you the answer to that question, my friends, from the printed records of the writings of my opponent, the recorded talks of my opponent, and the public endorsement of his political machine. In the Lafourche Comet on Thursday, August the 19th, 1954, my opponent wrote, I quote, "I sincerely hope that by now a majority of you have read the announcement of my candidacy on an absolutely independent ticket," unquote. He says he is running on an independent ticket, and I think that the voters of this city are entitled to know the other members of that so-called independent ticket. Let him tell us the names of those candidates on that alleged independent ticket, and the voters of our city then can judge just how independent he really is. In a radio talk over station KTIB on October the 10th, 1954, my opponent stated, and I quote, "I promise you that I shall cooperate with my two commissioners," unquote. It is only natural then to suppose that his two commissioners are the same two referred to above on the so-called independent ticket. On Monday night, September the 27th, the night before the first primary, my opponent was publicly endorsed for mayor by the city chief of police in a public affront to civic decency. This chief of police is under the direct jurisdiction of the present mayor, who is a part and parcel of the city and parish political machine. Are we to presume, my friends, that this sort of endorsement creates a new kind of independence? No. No, my friends. If you go back to my dictionary definition of independent, you can only conclude that my opponent is a candidate of the political machine. This is the most unusual race, wherein the candidate does not claim his backers and the backers do not claim their candidate. This should answer the question that my opponent asked on September the 9th as to why should attempts be made to tie him with any political faction. To top all of this, ladies and gentlemen, for 9 weeks now, my opponent has been writing words upon words in an attempt to explain what he means when he says he is independent. He has been beating about the bush with many hundreds of words, rather fruitlessly, and then in the comment of Thursday, August the 19th, 1954, he says, and I quote, "Take into consideration that I may have been unable to adequately impress you with words. But then, what are words really worth?" Unquote. My opponent, by implication, wishes to show you that words are worthless, and yet he continues to speak them and to write them. Don't be confused by this, my friends, because words have a very definite and specific meaning. So I ask, why does he write so many words and speak so many words if he thinks that words are useless? My friends, if you will remember, last Sunday we were at the racetrack. We were watching the horse with the unusual long tandem saddle. We recognized the first jockey in that tandem saddle. He was the city chief of police, violently flogging his horse with the rod of empire. The horse was kicking up a lot of shells and huge clouds of dust. For that reason, we could recognize only the chief of police, but did observe that there were other riders in that tandem saddle. The horse has not made any progress since then. My opponent did not speak over the radio last Sunday. So, even though the horse did not advance, I am now able to recognize the second jockey in that tandem saddle. Every now and then, he holds the hands of the chief and guides the horse first to one side and then to the other. This jockey is Mayor Charles Delos. Hiding behind the chief, every once in a while, the mayor digs his heels into the flanks of the horse, and with angry intentions too, hoping thereby to impart spirit and a will to run. I am able to recognize the present mayor because he did a lot of talking to this horse in order to get him to enter the race, because he has solicited votes for this horse, because he has talked in behalf of this horse, because he is supporting this horse, because he voted for this horse, and because his chief of police made a public endorsement of this horse. From where I stand, it is difficult to recognize the other jockeys in that tandem saddle. As the horse approaches, if he continues to run under this great weight, I may have an opportunity to identify the additional jockeys. And my friends, it has been humorously said that other potential jockeys have been visiting the horse during the past week. After 8 weeks of running without a platform, we noted that my opponent suddenly found it wise and prudent to hurriedly build up a makeshift 9-point platform. Since he is backed by and supported by my opponent of 8 years ago, it might be of interest for me to recall the #1 plank in the platform of my former opponent as published in the Lafourche Comet on Thursday, August the 1st, 1946. Plank #1, I quote, "Reduction of utility rates or granting of homestead exemptions," unquote. Since it is obvious that my opponent is backed by the present mayor and that he has been advised to place a similar plank in his platform, it would be only logical to say that the recently drummed up plank would have no more value than the one published 8 years ago. These could very well be just some more words. In the same publication mentioned before, my opponent of 8 years ago had a plank #11, I quote, "Erection of a new garbage incinerator, land purchase and engineers employed," unquote. Now, my present opponent does not mention anything about an incinerator, and it could be that he was misled by that plank of 8 years ago and took it at face value, and therefore presumed that the garbage incinerator had been constructed. At this point, I would like to comment that it was ill-advised for the outgoing mayor and his political machine to select a hand-picked successor. This sort of thing seldom works out to the advantage of all the people. It would have been more graceful by far to let the people select their own candidate without machine interference. In closing, my friends, may I remind you that I am still #3 on the voting machine, the same independent candidate that entered the race on August the 8th. May I ask you to weigh my qualifications and my desire to serve you, and then go to the polls and cast your ballot for a mayor who possesses business judgment, political experience, and the courageous leadership necessary to bring about the proper development of our city. Let's not be confused by the tactics of the opposition. Let's not be misled by the last-minute rumors and wild stories of this political machine. And above all, my friends, don't lend your pot to this political machine to cook your goose. I will be back with you at this same time next Sunday and every Sunday until the election over this same station. This talk will be rebroadcast on Friday, October the 29th at 10 minutes after 5 in the afternoon. Ask your friends to listen. And remember, shake that tree. Let's be free by voting for number 3. Thank you very much, my friends, for listening.
This is the city, Thibodaux, Louisiana, Tuesday, November 9th, 1954, 6 a.m. The voters are beginning to be free. They're shaking that tree. They're voting for number 3.
Number three, voters all agree. When we vote for number 3, then we will all be free. Shake that tree, let's be free. Vote for number 3. How surprised the boss will be when we vote for number 3.
Tuesday, November 9th, 1954, 8:30 p.m. The voters are now free. They all voted for number 3. Here are the facts.
Power politics has ended.
Councilmanic form of government.
Reconsideration of electric rates.
Industrial development.
A bigger and better Thibodaux.
A new era has begun.
Leonard J. Toups, your mayor.